Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Guardbeardia. It's me, the Beldam, back at it again with another part of Chapter 4. I don't know how many parts are going to be in Chapter 4, but we're just going to be in for the ride, honestly. Enjoy! Chapter 4, Part 3. The path they were following was actually an old highway that ran south, with Morrill running along the dirt shoulder while Emily zoomed in the emergency lane, every once in a while rubbing along the wake-me-ups out of boredom. Morrill had pulled a dagger out of the crate after they had landed from their drop, and Emily would see her drag it out of her saddlebags and check it every once in a while. She steered her Zundep a little closer to the Centaur and waved at her, pointing her right hand at the device when she pulled it out again. "What is that thing?" Morrill gave it a little wiggle, her ears bouncing in her gait. "It's a military GPS system. Technically we're not allowed to have these, but they can be jailbroken in order to get access to military mapping. They don't like it too much when they find us with these, so be sure not to ask about it if we get near the feds." "Huh, Ogledock break that one?" "Nah, he has a techomancer that does it. Little wiry fellow called Popham. He says he's an elf, but he's probably a halfling from how fat the little sucker is." Emily snorted and moved her gear selector into a higher setting, letting the motorcycle chur along a little more easily. Morrill's stamina was definitely something to write home about, as the Centaur had been running alongside Emily for almost 30 miles now. Around the 35-mile mark, she caught Morrill taking a sniff of something from a small bottle, then chug an entire canteen of water before tucking it back into her saddlebags. Emily was curious just what the hell that was about, but figured she shouldn't pry into her personal affairs. When they had gone over 57 miles, Morrill needed a break, and they pulled off the shoulder, just outside the town of Palm Gardens. To be fair, this part of Nevada was still as blistering as a college dorm room hot plate, and while Emily was just slightly sweating on her motorbike, Morrill was having to do actual work with her own legs. When they pulled over, Morrill was breathing hard and pumping the hem of her uniform top she wore over her human portion. Before they had set out, she had changed into her normal work uniform and had stowed away her fancy costume, deciding against sweating it to death while running through the desert. It took a bit of doing, but Emily was able to take off her helmet, finding a neck ring had gotten stuck to her skin with the combination of sweat and dust forming some kind of hellish cement. She gave her hair a shake as Morrill guffawed, finally breaking down and unbuttoning her uniform top to get some air on her flesh. "Holy crap, I remember why I hate these states," Morrill gasped, fanning desperately at her exposed sports bra. Emily peered at it and wondered just what kind of space-age material was used in the damn thing to keep up with Morrill's pace. "Usually folk come down here to gamble, get married, or die via alcohol poisoning. One sure does sound like an easy way out." Emily ran her hand down her hair braid, flicking dust out of her crimson strands. "Yeah, a green card was the sure way to get out of here, usually." Morrill tilted her head, still pumping away at the hem of her uniform top as her tail flicked at a pair of bugs near her rear saddlebags. "A what? Is the green card some kind of drink?" Emily just laughed as dryly as the air around her and leaned forward on her sun-heated handlebars. Palm Gardens lay ahead, warping in the heat waves of the desert, and the town really didn't look like much. Palm Gardens, according to her phone, as she did her best to block out the sun from the screen, was a Twilight Zone neighborhood, a little place off the road that held a small collection of homes and a gas station. That was, of course, before the changes that gripped the world, and now it played a host to far more houses and far stranger people. After the clash, the weird feeling about the town grew, as if feeding on the festering wounds of all the dimensions, creating its own little sphere of strange. When the sun wasn't rising in the wrong direction, or the sun not rising at all, the Fae loved this place, many of the unseelie court taking it as a home away from home, their first home, naturally, being Las Vegas. Castle Tower homes stood next to quaint suburban houses. Dark elves took the overnight shifts at grocery stores, and not all the meat within them were from cows, pigs, and chickens. After Morrill had cooled down and slugged more water, they took off at a slower pace, Emily just letting her bike trundle along without using any real throttle, which allowed Morrill to just trot alongside. When they both entered the influence sphere of Palm Gardens, the air around them dropped almost 20 degrees, and Morrill sighed in relief, lifting her uniform top to expose her sweat-soaked stomach muscles. "Oh, thank God!
Oriflamme is still living here.
Who? Emily asked, who had begun swerving her Zundap from side to side in the boredom of having to go slow. Unseelie Prince, you could call him a frost elf if you really had to put an adjective on him. Likes his sun, but doesn't like the heat. Keeps the town cool for more his own enjoyment than anything else. Emily nodded her head to the side while smiling. Already a big fan myself. The cool air did feel really nice in comparison to the brutal desert heat, and Emily took her helmet off, tossing it into the sidecar so she could enjoy the fresh wind on her face. As they made their way down the road towards the gas station, Emily noticed a lot of eyes peeping out at her and Marill from the windows of homes, and did her best to cheerily wave at them when she noticed. Most of them stepped back from their curtains or blinds, while very few of them waved back. Palm Gardens did have a few friendly faces, however, as when they pulled up to the singular gas station, it seemed to be run by a small family of dark elves. Par of course, their favorite color of clothing seemed to be black and gray. But one little glimmer of hope came running up to Marill while she was standing in front of the open door to a fridge, both mulling over beer and enjoying the frigid temperature coming out. The little dark elf boy held his arms up to Marill, hopping up and down on his feet. Centaur! Unlike his family, who watched on as they worked the register or stocked shelves, the little dark elf boy seemed to favor bright pink and purple as his favorite colors, the only black on him being the swirling tribal tattoos that adorned his face. The shirt, while pink, had a picture of a shark hanging fin on a surfboard. His shorts were just simple purple cargo pants with long toggles on the bottom for a bit of flair. What you want, Squirt? Centaur! Up! Up! Marill rolled her eyes, but smiled, leaning down and picking him up in her muscular arms. Look, kid, the first one is free, but after that your dad is going to have to start paying me in beer. The male dark elf working the register looked up and held up a single finger.
One ride, Torium.
Aw, but Daddy, all back of store full of beer. The dark elf closed his eyes patiently, fatherly, then opened them, locking eyes with the boy. His pout didn't last past Marill, putting him just in front of her forward saddlebags, and as she selected a six-pack of red ale, he was happily playing with her black braided hair and holding on around her stomach as she walked down the snack aisle. Emily watched on and already made up her mind that she wasn't giving any free rides if she could help it. Having a gas station here was definitely a plus, allowing her to top off her tank, make sure her batteries were charged, and buy some extra water for her and Marill. These dark elves were savvy folk, as they not only sold bottles of water, but 30 to 40-gallon drums of the stuff, a few of which she tucked down into the footspace of her sidecar. Lulled into relaxation by thrumming central air of the place, both Emily and Marill bought a brace of Slurpees and sat at a few tables, one of which was pleasantly designed for centaurs. The little boy, Torum, had fallen asleep against Marill's back by the time they were halfway through their drinks, the two checking the dagger, maps, and online news sources since the gas station had Wi-Fi. The Badlands were up to all kinds of strange things, it seemed, and a huge cluster of stuff had slammed down in the Dead Mountains wilderness area. A few parties had gone in, only one came out, and they ran across some kind of engine that, while powerful, ran on a fuel source they couldn't figure out. The military forces that ring the mountains outside Fort Mojave were also under siege by some kind of cult that came out from the water. Usual fishman nonsense that chummed up from people trying to make nice with the shadow beasts. To the south, in the Sacramento Mountains, the purification device had turned onto an unknown setting, as if it was trying to combat the saltwater creatures, and the attacks on the outpost built around it had a sharp uptick. Unlike the creatures that prowled around the Dead Mountains, using close quarter and organic weapons, the ones in the Sacramento Mountains were using ballistic weaponry. The majority of these were slug-throwing rifles and pistols salvaged from someone selling them to the creatures. A few energy blasts had caused heavy damage to fortifications, and some men were being eaten alive by living ammunition. Balls of teeth that chewed and chewed until there was nothing left to gnaw. Emily and Marill were alarmed at that particular notion. The cults that served the shadow beasts could be compared to radical environmentalist groups. Shadow beasts have feelings too had been one of their more famous slogans, before they had been turned into abominations that dragged other living beings into the sea to be warped. Why they weren't being eaten was a mystery,
and any cultist that was snatched up would kill themselves, either by weapon, blunt force trauma, or just snapping their own fishy necks with their hands. It was a well-known taboo to sell things to these people, but it appeared that someone was on hard enough times to be selling them not only conventional rifles, but things they found from other dimensions. Morel scratched at her chin with her straw, while reaching behind her back to keep Torim from falling off. "Why don't they just pull in weapons for them in the first place?" Emily shrugged flamboyantly, her Slurpee tilting dangerously. "Hey, I just work here. Don't go asking me how the shadow monsters work." As the two of them laughed, the mother of Torim ghosted over, her footsteps so light that she may as well have been floating. Her smile was kind despite how freakishly long her canines were, and she reached down to grab her son. "Thank you. We got more work done than usual with him out of the way. Take this as a payment for babysitting." With her other hand, she gently set down another 6-pack of red ale, and Morel cracked her fingers as if she had just pulled off a brilliant ruse. "Yep, best pillow around. Just ask the nugget head over here." Emily smirked and flicked her straw at Morel, who swatted it back at her. The dark elf smiled again, bowed slightly, and ghosted away with her son, who was still asleep on her shoulder. After reviewing the maps, they both agreed that staying the night here and then taking off in the morning would be the best choice, as the Dead Mountains were just a few miles away and could be reached in only a few hours if they decided to crawl there. Emily, 1 Slurpee poorer, and Morel, a 6-pack richer, left the gas station and made their way to a dive-tel, specialized motels for drivers from all walks of life. They usually had daily rates, weekly rates, and specialized places to hold anything found in case it was dangerous, and also had forwarding services in case you never came back, making sure your remains or belongings made their way to your family. They were also quite expensive, if not swanky. Being a diver was something of an honored job, sort of like a soldier, and most dive-tails went out of their way to make sure that they were more than comfortable, as a diver never knew if the next day was their last. Morel seemed to indulge in this as she thumped down like a gigantic sack of potatoes on her king-size bed, not even bothering to take off her saddlebags as she face-planted into the cotton sheets. The Centaur just groaned into the bed, blowing a raspberry into the sheets. "Why does the heat make you tired faster?"
"Because heat is evil, and the main enemy of mankind. At least when you freeze to death, you just fall asleep," Emily replied cheerily, kicking off her boots and then sitting down on her normal-sized queen bed. The sand had done the same cement number on her socks, and she winced as the cuff made distressing crackling noises. Once the sea was broken, she peeled them off and tossed them into a laundry basket nearby, and hoped they wouldn't run off and hide before she had a chance to wash 'em. While Morel was content to frump on the bed in all her sweaty glory, Emily was keen to take a shower and walked into the expensive bathroom, her feet plapping amusingly on the expensive tile. The bathroom itself could have slept 5 with room to spare, and the bathtub alone could have comfortably housed a snuggling pair. Emily sighed happily, and noticing the expensive bottles of shampoos and soap, and took off her uniform shirt, pulling the stiff cloth up and over her face, had been turning as she did so, and when it popped above her face, she was staring at someone she had not seen in a long time with such detail. The mirror in her own bathroom was mostly just for her face, as it was not long enough to really show her much of anything else, and she had stopped taking pictures of herself due to lack of need. She now stood before a large floor-length mirror on the back of the door she had not noticed, and for the first time saw how much her body had changed. Having more than enough money to eat well had fed the muscles she had gained while doing workouts with Morel, adding little bulks to her deltoids, biceps, and triceps, while her tummy had tucked in nicely. Her undershirt only made this evident because the sweaty thing was clinging to her like a wet napkin, and she peeled it off as well, making an audible sound of disgust once her skin was free of it. Emily took a moment to admire her new diver bod, flexing moronically in the mirror and making faces that only Arnold himself would approve of. Emily drew a cheeky grin across her face and pulled out her phone, taking a mid-angle selfie while flexing with her free arm. She giggled as it reminded her of her old self back home, and she quickly typed it up to put it out on her stream community page. The likes and comments began rolling in almost immediately, all of them positive, and only a few being gross. She tossed her phone on the sink counter, took off her bra and the rest of her clothes, unbraided her hair, and stepped into the massive airlock chamber that also doubled as a shower. The shower had a rainfall head on it, and Emily just stood in the middle of the hot, comforting shower of water. Water fell down around her shoulders, peeling away the sweat and dust, and she thought back to Jamaica and her walking back to the company building in the rain. She smiled, but jumped as a rumble of thunder echoed around her, almost causing her to crack her head on the river pebble shower floor as her heel slipped on him.
The hell?
Emily whirled around trying to find where the noise came from, and saw that there was actually a control panel on the wall, glowing blue and around the size of a large tablet. A small door on the glass shower wall was next to it, and Emily opened it, squinting out at the words that were being fuzzed up by the steam. She snorted and reached through, turning off the soothing storm simulation option, and telling it to just let her have a normal shower. Now that there wasn't a simulated thunder cell about to whirl around her, she began working on actually getting clean, scrubbing at her hair with perfumed soaps and doing her best to scrub the salt cement off her skin. She had just gotten the conditioner into her hair when the shower dinged, and she opened an eye, looking around. A soft female voice purred out from the ceiling, where the speaker was likely hidden, and a small shelf began to rise up from the floor of the shower corner.
"You have been showering for some time. Would you like to take care of your other hygiene as well?"
Emily blinked the water out of her other eye and looked down at the shelf near her, and saw that it held a small tube of toothpaste, a toothbrush, a single-bladed safety razor, and a pair of scissors, a waterproof electric shaver, a hairbrush, a comb, and finally, a single chocolate mint. Emily leaned over it, admiring the quality of the tools before picking up the mint first.
Fancy little shower you are, aren't you?
She unwrapped it, tossed it into her mouth, then used the comb to work the conditioner even further into her hair. When that was done, she grabbed the safety razor and began shaving her legs and armpits after applying the cream. Emily couldn't help but whistle happily as she took care of everything she needed in one spot, and after a bit of weed whacking with the scissors, felt fresher than she had back home. The last things on the docket were rinsing the conditioner from her hair and brushing her teeth, and with those objectives completed, she called it good on the shower. With her hair and body wrapped in plush towels, Emily traipsed back into the main area of the room, and saw that Marill still had not moved from her soft nest of blankets. Judging from how her ears flicked forwards towards the noise of the door opening, Emily reckoned she was still awake, despite her eyes being closed.
"Hey, horsewoman, go get washed up before you make this place smell like a barn."
Marill creaked open her eyes while drawing her eyebrows in, bringing it all together into a wry glare.
"That fruit is hanging so low the grass can tickle its puckered parts."
"What, half your body is horse and you've been running through the desert?" Marill held up a middle finger at Emily, who laughed and sat on her bed a few feet away.
"Keep on being smart to me and I'll show you what the hooves are good for when I river dance on you."
Marill, thankfully, was smiling when she said this, and Emily was confident that no river dancing on her spine was going to be experienced that night. Marill shrugged off her saddlebags, detached her traveling boots, and clopped her way into the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. Emily waited a few minutes until she heard Marill going about inside, then stood, wiping off her towel and fully drying off in the cooler air. After being in trousers and a long-sleeved uniform top in the hot sun, pulling on a pair of pajamas and a tank top was blissful, and she flopped down onto the comforter of her bed. She wiggled a bit, feeling what it was like without wearing underwear, and judged that maybe that insane Oni on the coffin car was onto something. With powerful Wi-Fi at her command, Emily spooled up her laptop and got a stream going, fishing out a bed table and putting it above her resting legs. Her followers all piled in at once and began asking her all manner of questions, such as where she was going, and what she hoped to find. When she replied that she was looking for a Tommy ray gun, everyone agreed that it would make a fine addition to her collection. Emily was halfway through describing her other coworkers when Marill walked out of the bathroom, not wearing a towel, and Emily had to whip a pillow up in front of her face while yelling at her.
"Marill, I have a stream going. Put on a damn shirt."
Marill gave her a puzzled look.
"What, you can sleep on these but can't bear to look at 'em?"
Her stream chat was a flurry of activity, since Emily had told them about her first since she was her traveling companion, and there were many requests for Emily to spin the camera around so they could get a look too.
While Mariel chuckled and scrabbled around for a shirt, Emily spent a few minutes admonishing her stream chat for being a bunch of thirsty perverts. She kept the stream going for a few more hours with Mariel sitting next to her, clothed and drinking beer like it was water, until they got tired of reacting to funny videos and answering weird questions about Centaur anatomy. No matter how weird the world got, the internet was always weirder by leaps and bounds, regardless of how many dimensions had smashed into human Earth. When the stream was shut down, both Emily and Mariel were still awake enough to watch a movie, finding a copy of Lord of War on the wall's display hard drive. Mariel had a delivery service drop off more beer for her, and when the Centaur opened the door of their dive-tail room, Emily not only heard, but saw Mariel enter a state of mind she had not seen before. "Well, hey there, handsome. Got a package for me?" Emily smiled with an agape mouth and leaned as far as she could from her bed to see past Mariel, and saw that a rather rugged-looking human was at the door, sporting the usual cowboy tuxedo. Cowboy boots, blue jeans, plaid button-up with the first two buttons undone, and a rolled cattleman atop his head, which he had pitched backwards for a bit of country charm. Mariel leaned her human portion against the door, doing her best to look casual from what Emily could reckon. The delivery man looked up at her, a tablet held in one hand and a large plastic bag in the other.
Are you Mariel Skyhoof?"
She leaned in, giving him a flirtatious smile while her hand traced up the side of the door. Mariel was doing her best to sound sultry and alluring, but the twitches of her ears and tail were giving away the nervousness inside. "Yeah, that's me." Emily snorted from where she was sitting and clapped her hands to her mouth to muffle her sudden onset of giggles. She saw Mariel's long ears perk up at the noise behind her, and her skin was beginning to flush.
"I'm gonna need you to sign here. Order is 25 cans of Bronzebeard Red Ale and 5 fudge pies."
The delivery man leaned back warily as Mariel leaned in slightly, offering him the signed tablet. "You know, there's more than enough beer here to share. Why don't you come on in and stay a while?" He blinked a few times, then took the tablet, slipping it into his delivery satchel.
"I'm good. Have a nice night, ma'am."
Before he turned to walk away, he tipped his hat towards Mariel, and the only thing to answer her sulking pout was the echo of his boots on the floor. Emily was able to control her spasming lungs long enough to utter a single word of condolence to Mariel, and the Centaur shrunk visibly when she heard it. Oof. Mariel spun around, slamming the door with one hand and clutching her bags in the other. "Don't laugh at me! That shit always works when your puya does it! Why doesn't it work with me? I wasn't even wearing a bra and bent down to let him see the goods!" Emily was beside herself now, clutching her ribs and snickering out in mirth. Mariel was naturally embarrassed, and her ears hung low as her cheeks burned red. As the Centaur walked over and slipped onto her own bed, Emily struck a comically seductive pose, running a finger down the edge of the nightstand. She was able to just get the same tone of voice Mariel tried to use on the delivery man, but played it up with false charm. "Well, hey there, handsome." Mariel cracked open a beer angrily, staring straight ahead, unamused, and didn't even look at Emily. Emily wasn't going to let it go easily, however. "I've got all this beer and no underwire support. Why don't you come on in and do some heavy lifting?" Emily studied the comment by running her own hand down her ribs and hip. Mariel's lips pursed as she fought not to smile, and she pinned her ears back, still doing her best not to look at Emily and give her the satisfaction of attention. Emily turned it up another notch and rolled over, half her body just slightly off the side of her bed. She slid her hands up and down her shirt, exposing a little bit of her stomach in the process. As she spoke, she still kept the over-the-top seductress tone. "There's more than enough woman here for you. Why don't you come on over here and I'll show you how to really buck?" Mariel shot beer foam out of her nose when Emily dropped the buck at the end of the sentence, and she started coughing while laughing, wiping away at her face. When she had gotten all the foam off her mouth and nose, she glared at Emily with a smile, who was still hanging off the side of her bed smugly. "Oh, fuck off, you little tot. You're as bad as your puya." Emily held out her arms to Mariel, opening and closing her hands. "Aw, come here, my sad little Centaur. I'll give you a cuddle." "I'll eat your chocolate pie and shut up." A small package thwacked Emily on the face with a loud smack, and Emily started snorting in laughter again. Muriel didn't find it all nearly as funny as she did, and sat on the bed, chugging away at her can of beer and angrily eating her fudge pies. Emily righted herself and scooped the pie off the ground, sitting up near the back of the bed and unwrapping it while the movie started. By the time they were selling communist-made bullets to fascists, Muriel had smashed almost all of her beers and sat blearily blinking on her own bed, drunk. Emily was still sipping on her second, getting a pretty good buzz going and breaking off another piece of a Swiss chocolate bar she had gotten from the room fridge. Emily heard Muriel get up and lifted the can again to her lips, eyebrows raised, as Muriel tottered her way around the end of the bed to the other side, flopping down next to Emily. "Emily, I'm sad." She slurped from the can of red ale for a moment, then looked down at Muriel, waiting for the next bit that would come if she was patient enough. "Can you cuddle me 'cause the cowboy didn't?" Emily raised her eyebrows up further and leaned down, plucking another chocolate bar from the fridge. "Would you like me to feed you chocolate to help dull the pain of rejection?" Muriel nodded sadly before whispering, "Yes, please," into Emily's side. "Oh, you sad little dum-dum," Emily murmured, before placing a piece of chocolate between Muriel's lips and then petting her head. Muriel worked the chocolate piece into her mouth and chewed it while Emily rustled her hair and drank again from the can of beer. Emily got halfway through the chocolate bar before Muriel was drunkenly asleep on her lap, and then polished it off herself, finishing the beer as well once the credits started rolling. Since her own bed was a standard queen-size hotel bed, there was very little room for her with a female centaur on it. But she just shrugged, reaching over for her phone, after taking a quick selfie of Muriel sleeping on her lap and posting it to her community page. Emily plumped up the pillows, snuggled on down with Muriel, and clicked off the light. After all, who was she to deny Muriel a bit of comfort? They were about to go into a war zone in the morning, and who knew what the day may bring?
And that is the end of Chapter 4, Part 3. If you guys liked the video, feel free to hit the thumbs up, send us a comment down below, what's your favorite part, your favorite character, your favorite voice that I do. I don't know. Let us know. If you liked it so much that you want to see more of it, feel free to subscribe, and if you liked it even more than that, then you can send us a donation via the Ko-fi link that's down in the description. And if you want to make sure that that donation actually gets to me, make sure to put my name or the title of the video you're donating from in the little description of that donation. But we'll see you all later. This has been Guardbeardia.